Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm so incredibly delighted to have as my guest Dr. Milton Mills. Dr. Mills is a medical physician trained in internal medicine, but now very much involved in intensive care medicine in Washington, D.C. He's a featured physician on the What the Health movie that was still on Netflix, and one of the amazing movies really revealing the importance of plant-based healthcare, and a strong advocate and voice for really helping people gain that autonomy in terms of their own health and well-being by adopting plant-based living. So Dr. Mills, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I going back, I always am interested when someone like you, who is a very strong voice in this whole movement, was there any kind of health issue or anything that propelled you into this mindset, or when did that take place in your life? Was it prior to your medical education? Were there issues earlier on in your life that prompted that?
So that's a very interesting question, because my introduction to plant-based nutrition and my sort of entry into this lifestyle is what actually led me into medicine. And let me see if I can kind of give you an abridged version of how it happened, because it really came from more of a religious and spiritual direction. When I was 13, my parents informed my brothers planning to get a divorce. And it came as a complete shock to us, because they hadn't been having they weren't fighting, it wasn't acrimonious, but for various reasons, they decided that it was better for them to separate. But, from the standpoint of us as kids, it was like our world exploded. And, I was always very kind of a thoughtful kid, and response to this was to ask, would my life kind of be this sort of random series of very painful, unanticipated experiences, or was there some way to navigate life and minimize these painful experiences? And so the first question I felt I needed to answer in that regard was whether or not God was real. Because if God did not exist, I did not want to spend my life in a useless round of religious observances that didn't profit me. But again, the flip side of that coin was equally true, that if God, in fact, does exist, it would be absurd to try and live my life without acknowledging him and making him a part of my life. So initially, I started speaking with various clergy from different denominations, and they would tell me things that just did not make sense. And when I would press them on these issues, they would say, well, you can't ask those questions, you just have to accept this. And that didn't ring true, because I thought, why would God give me a brain and tell me not to use it? So finally decided that I would just read the Bible and talk to God, because I figured if God is alive, he should be able to tell me what his word meant. And so out of that, I read the Bible, talked to God, and what jumped out immediately was right up front in the very first chapter, after he creates Adam and Eve, he tells them what to eat. And he told them to consume an entirely plant-based diet. And it even gets a little more sophisticated and even more interesting, because initially they were put on an entirely fruit-based diet, but after they kind of messed up and had to be put out of the Garden of Eden, and they were denied access to this special fruit from the tree of life, he enlarged their diet to include what Genesis refers to as the herbs of the field, which by interpretation are grains, legumes, root vegetables, green leafy vegetables, starchy vegetables. And so, but again, it was still an entirely plant-based diet. And so again, from reading what was there, looking around at the denominations that existed, I was led to become a Seventh-day Adventist because that church encourages its members to become plant-based because that's what the Bible teaches is our natural diet. And about a year and a half after joining the church, I in fact did, after again further discussions with God, change my diet and eliminate all meat. And after doing so, I really felt the difference in the way my health improved, my energy level improved, my thinking cleared up. I was a teenager, my acne disappeared, stopped getting colds, never got the flu again. And so it was very clear to me that yes, this was in fact a much healthier diet, much better for me. I was reading everything I could find in, kind of the lay press on diet and health, and everything I could access supported the fact that populations that were plant-based were healthier, they lived longer, they had fewer diseases. And as I moved into my later teens and early 20s, my family members started having health problems, friends, family members started having health problems, and even started suffering heart attacks, being diagnosed with cancers, and even passing away. And so I decided I wanted to spend my life helping people to understand that they did not have to slowly fall apart and die prematurely if they would only adopt a diet that was more natural, that their bodies were designed to eat, and get away from these animal-centered diets that we have been duped into consuming. And so that's why I ultimately decided to go to medical school, was both to have a very thorough understanding of human health and physiology and disease, but also to have the credentials that people would respect when I told them, you need to be plant-based in order to be healthy and avoid disease.
It's intriguing because the foundation of this organization, the NHA, stems from the early health pioneers of the 19th century that really challenged the abysmal conditions of the time. And one of those major health pioneers was Ellen White, who was the founder of the Adventists. So it's kind of an intriguing piece that she was such a seminal figure in health reform into the early part of the 20th century. Did you end up going to Loma Linda? Is that where you went to medical school too?
No. I actually went to Stanford Medical School, and it was a blessing because Stanford is a very research-oriented university, and it's an amazing place because most of the major universities are somewhat balkanized in terms of where their various schools, biology, law, medicine are located. They're not on the main campus. Stanford's different. On that main campus, all of the graduate schools as well as the undergraduate campus are all there. And that makes it really, really easy to just, walk across campus and go to the graduate biology library, the law library, the medical library. And so it was really possible for me to do a lot of exploration and research into this whole question of, are humans designed to eat animal tissue? And to explore it from the standpoint of doing a comparative anatomy analysis of looking at what constitutes a mammalian carnivore, what anatomical and physiologic features are associated with mammalian herbivores, and then to look at humans and see where we fell on that spectrum. And then to even look at what are true omnivores, because we are kind of rather glibly said to be omnivores based on observing what we eat, but that's really not the best way to determine what is best for us to eat, because if you decide what humans should do based on what you see us doing, you'd come out with a whole bunch of erroneous conclusions. And in fact, we are not at all by design omnivores. We are clearly, strictly strict herbivores by physiology, anatomy, and we don't have the equipment to procure and consume animal tissue at all. And when we do, it creates disease, as we see every day in Western countries.
I'm here with Dr. Milton Mills. We're going to take just a few moments to hear a word from our sponsor, the National Health Association, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Health Science Podcast Show. I want to remind you to visit the National Health Association website, where you'll find incredible resources to support your healthy lifestyle, including plant-exclusive eating without added salt, oil, and sugar. Simply go to healthscience.org or nationalhealthassociation.org. Be sure to check out membership, which is only $35 per year for those living within the United States and $55 for those living outside the U.S. You'll be amazed at all the information and benefits you'll receive. As a member, you're kept up to date on the latest evidence-based tools for health promotion. You'll receive the incomparable quarterly magazine, Health Science, a beautiful 40-page advertising-free publication mailed to your home or offices, loaded with articles, recipes, inspirational stories, and interviews with world leaders in the fields of personal health, plant-based nutrition, water-only fasting, animal rights, and environmental support. And you'll receive details about life-changing events, such as the extraordinary annual conference of the National Health Association and diverse opportunities for plant-exclusive NHA cruises and travel vacations to exotic destinations around the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and now back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm here having an incredible discussion with Dr. Milton Mills, really addressing the foundation of plant-based eating, truthfully. We met recently at that Veg Fest where they had the bodybuilding competition, the vegan bodybuilders. And I have to tell you, you gave a presentation on the very thing you were just alluding to right now, and it was absolutely brilliant. I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you.
I really, truly appreciated the work that you put together. As you were doing those studies, I'm just curious, because now you were in the medical world, and I know you were trying to embrace the basic sciences because you wanted that information. Was it difficult dealing with the other aspects that you had to participate in medicine, which are far and away from this idea that we have this ability to heal and reverse major pathology by doing these very helpful things with diet? And I know that was not part of your education. So how difficult was that to kind of weave your way through that while you were, uncovering all this other information?
Sure. That's an absolutely fascinating question, because, as what you're alluding to is the fact that medicine is not set up to support the idea of prevention and looking at diet as a means of either treating or preventing disease. And I'll give you just kind of a little anecdote from when I was interviewing for medical school. Was actually interviewing at a school in Boston, and my interviewer asked me what I was interested in. And again, as I said, I knew why I was going to medical school, so I launched into my spiel about preventive medicine. He listened very patiently, and he said, well, you don't want to end up like the dentist. And I looked at him quizzically and said, what do you mean? He said, well, they fluoridated the water and now they have no patients. And I committed the ultimate faux pas in an interview. I looked horrified. and he tried to clean it up by saying, well, what I mean is that in Western medicine, we operate from the disease model. We are in the business of treating sick people. We are not in the business of trying to keep people from becoming sick. And what he said was actually true as far as it goes. And when you look at how Western medicine developed and importantly, when it developed, that is, it started to come into its own in the late 18th early 19th century, as people began to develop microscopes and discovered bacteria and fungi and viruses, and then germ theory developed, and the major killers of humans, epidemic diseases, infectious problems, trauma, and so forth. And medicine developed in order to respond to those problems and try to, save people from those kinds of issues. But and because nobody had refrigerators and nobody had factory farming, so very few people could produce animal foods in quantities or preserve them in ways that would allow large numbers of people to eat huge quantities of animal foods, so that they would have the ability to develop chronic diseases, except the very rich, which is why things like gout and so forth were rich men's diseases. Poor people were still, by and large, plant-based out of simple necessity. They simply couldn't afford to eat animal foods all day long. It was only this phenomenon of chronic disease, chronic diseases such as widespread heart disease. All of these things are really 20th century, mid to late 20th century diseases that have paralleled the Industrial Revolution and industrialization of our food production methods and so forth. So, but the problem is that the way we teach medicine, the way we think about disease, has not kept pace with the changing nature of the diseases that we see. We are still trying to treat chronic diseases from the standpoint of there's some sort of discrete cause, there's some bug or there's something that's causing it, as opposed to, no, it's your behavior that's causing it. It is what you are eating and putting into your mouth on a daily basis that's causing this, and that's what needs to change. There's no, stent or operation that's going to reverse a chronic disease. You've got to change your behavior.
Well, the devastating disconnect, as I look at it, is that, when you have these conditions of lifestyle, I think medicine, look, the yeoman efforts they do, emergency care, all of that acute care that we talk about, no one's arguing that the benefit of that incredible skill to handle that.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of intriguing that, they'll relent on the idea that these lifestyle factors can play a role in prevention. But surely if you develop something chronically, we need some magical, interventional war on this outcome, when in fact, the same conditions that prevent are the same conditions that can reverse the most devastating pathologies. And that disconnect is where the harm happens for so many people that are subjecting themselves to that kind of care. So it's kind of intriguing.
Sure. And in fact, actually, most of our colleagues don't realize that lifestyle can actually reverse these diseases. They have a vague understanding that they may be able to slow down and, prevent to some extent. But most of our colleagues would be jaw-dropped, dumbfounded to see the kinds of coronary lesion regressions that Esselstyn and endocrinologists, again, would be dumbfounded to realize that you can completely put type 2 diabetes into remission by putting people on a pure, low-fat, plant-based diet, eliminating all of the animal protein, animal fat, processed carbs, and so forth. But these things are absolutely possible and happen all the time for people who are willing to make those changes. And even more phenomenally, I believe that many, if not most, autoimmune diseases are actually exaggerated hyperinflammatory diseases that are manifestations of severe leaky gut phenomenon, where people are getting a translocation of animal protein fragments through an inflamed colon into their bloodstream that are triggering antibody responses that then cross-react with their tissues in susceptible individuals. And when they come off the animal foods, and start eating the whole food, high fiber, plant-based diet, their colon heals. They stop absorbing these protein fragments, and that process quiets down, and the disease goes into remission. And I mean, it almost happens like clockwork. So very clear that these are plagues of our own making.
And there's no question that the data on, animal foods, refined processed foods, stress, and the impact on dysbiosis, to address what you just said, is very powerful and very, very real for sure. Let me address something else, because when you talk about the eating habits, I love the fact that you have such a strong voice about the lies that we tell ourselves and the lies that are imposed upon us when you discuss what you call the disgust modes. I love that discussion that I saw somewhere that you had on a psychogenic and moral level, where we kind of, voices of authority create scenarios that allow us to justify things that are truly not in our best interest or our true nature. Can you address that concept of disgust modes that you've talked about in the past?
Sure, because that is, again, incredibly fascinating. It has to do with the human emotion of disgust. As humans, we are born with 6 innate emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. And these emotions are, from a teleological standpoint, believed to be essential for our survival, both as individuals and as a species. Because clearly, if you didn't know what to be fearful of, you would probably quickly be eaten by something. And if you didn't have an appropriate happiness response to things that would help improve your survival, you just wouldn't be attracted to the right things, and so on. Well, disgust, interestingly, has 3 domains. There is pathogen disgust, which concerns itself with things that we eat. There's moral disgust, which concerns itself with things that disturb social order, such as meanness, cruelty, lying, physical violence, abusiveness. And then there's sexual disgust, which concerns itself with unfavorable things that can create unfavorable sexual pairings, such as incest, pedophilia, and so forth. When you look at pathogen disgust, what is very interesting is that there are certain physical characteristics. I mean, clearly from society to society, there are things that are found disgusting in one society that are not necessarily believed to be disgusting in another society. But again, there are certain features that are found to be disgusting, essentially almost every society that we know of. What are those features? They're things that are moist, wet, slimy, bloody, amorphous in shape, things that are covered with hair, things that are rotting, things that have maggots or flies on them. And when you think about these qualities, it kind of becomes readily apparent that I'm describing raw animal tissue. And when you compare raw animal tissue to edible plant parts are all rounded, firm, smooth-edged, brightly colored, and they look, smell, and taste like plants. So what do we do to animal tissue to make it acceptable to us? We skin it, pluck it, remove the features that actually make it look like the animal that it came from. We turn it, we cut it into these rounded hand-sized objects. We cook it so it becomes firm, and we cover it with all these plant products to actually make it taste like the plants that our brains really want. And we do that so we can circumvent our actual innate disgust response to dead animal tissue. Now, the smell of rotting animal tissue will evoke essentially a vomit response in us. If we smell it, we will throw up. It'll cause us to retch. And that's a reflex, our brain, to try and get us to eject something that could kill us. That is not what you find in true carnivores and omnivores. They are actually drawn to rotting tissue because for them, that's actual nutritious food. And they have both gastrointestinal machinery and acid, and also the gastrointestinal immune tissue to deal with the pathogens in rotting tissue and not get sick from it. So they will actually seek out rotting tissue, eat from it for days and days, and not have any problem. But that's because that's what they're designed to do. We can't do that because we're really not supposed to be doing it at all. And so that's how we circumvent pathogen disgust. Now, when it comes to moral disgust, I have to always come up with some sort of justification for killing, even if it's absurd or ludicrous, which is, why we develop courts and juries and whatever, because killing is truly antithetical to our nature. And whenever we see a human wantonly killing anything, even if it's just some person out there stomping on worms or ants, that offends us. And we can only tolerate the killing of another living being if we can, in some way, justify it as being needed and necessary. And again, that just points out that shows that this is not who we are as a species or what we should be doing. Because I can assure you that when lions go out to kill, they don't ask themselves, should I do this? Is this right for me to do? No, if they see something they can kill, they kill it, whether they can eat it right then or not. I mean, if it's moving, they're going to kill it. And they do it without remorse. And for us, we have all these rules that, you're not supposed to kill babies. I don't have any problem with that. You're not supposed to beat up and abuse the elderly. In fact, that's who they actually seek out, because those are the animals that are easier to catch. It means they expend less energy for the same amount of calories. And in fact, they actually strengthen the gene pool of the species they prey on by doing so. But for us, that's a moral no-no. But again, it's because it really is against our nature to do so. Mm-hmm. So all these, and I mean, this is a very cursory and truncated explanation of this, because it really is very deep and fascinating when you think about the real implications of this and what it's telling us about who we are as a species.
And the other side of that is that when you adopt this plant-based or vegan type lifestyle, and you start really individually being a manifestation of compassion and empathy, which are really the highest ideals of human behavior and human emotion, that really is a very powerful tool for resetting, the moral compass that we basically have as our own species, which is very, very important and one of the strong suits of adopting this kind of a lifestyle.
You're absolutely right. And let me just, some of the most moving testimonies I've heard people talk about how after they become vegans, that they no longer wanted to kill anything. There's this one really buff, muscular adult guy who was saying how after he became vegan, he said, I would pick up bugs in my house and take them outside. Right. And he was saying that, and what was so striking to me was the way he talked about it was that this was something that happened to him. It wasn't a decision. It's not like he said, okay, well, now from now on, I'm going to do. He was saying it like this. He saw this happening to himself, that this was the moral development that was occurring inside of him. So yes, it is. You're absolutely right that once we embrace the plant-based lifestyle, the vegan lifestyle, that true moral nature is allowed to sort of present itself, manifest itself, and we become the people that we really should be.
I'm here with Dr. Milton Mills. And Milton, I'd love for you to let people know, our audience, where they can find you online, where they can go to get more information from you and about the things that you're doing. What's the website that you are at? Where are you at?
Yeah, the name is it's a little long, but it's very straightforward. It's Dr. Milton Mills, PlantBasedNation.com. It's banner down below. Dr. Milton Mills, PlantBasedNation.com. Lots of good information, lots of lectures, posts. I think people will find it very, very helpful and useful, and a source of good information for them, friends, and family members.
Yeah, I want to shift gears just a little bit and touch on something that you've been an incredible, advocate and kind of a voice for, and that is the relationship between plant-based consciousness, vegan consciousness, and institutional racism just a little bit. And I love a line that you said, and I want you to try to explain it, that you said that being a Black man in America, with all the devastating stereotypical innuendo and attacks that can occur because of that, growing up that way, that prepared you to be plant-based and vegan. Can you go into that just a little bit? I'd love your description and discussion of that.
Sure. America tells Black people from ways that are both overt and subtle that we're not as good, that we're not as smart, that we don't know what we're talking about or what we're doing. And when you grow up in the society, even when you are raised by parents who are proud Black people, as I was, you can't help but absorb some of that until you really start to think about the things that are going through your mind, and start to reject those self-doubts, those ideas, and realize that that you are as smart, as good as everyone else, actually smarter than a lot of people, and that your thoughts are, that as long as you are exercising appropriate integrity in terms of making sure that you are examining your thoughts, your beliefs, basing them on real evidence and good, solid information, that you can trust them and believe them and trust yourself. And so having to overcome that societal effort to kind of detract from my self-worth prepared me to be ready for people telling me that, oh, veganism is a crock, or being plant-based is dangerous, or you people don't know what you're doing, or your beliefs are wrong. Because after studying the science, I don't care that the majority of people aren't doing what's right. I know this is the truth.
Right.
I mean, it's the science is sound. And when people adopt the plant-based lifestyle, first of all, the scientific principles are sound. And then when you say, okay, well, the scientific principles are sound, well, what happens when people actually adopt the lifestyle? They get healthier, they get better, they live longer, they're more resistant to disease. Therefore, I don't care if the larger society is not adopting this lifestyle. I know it's the truth, and I'm not going to be swayed by the fact that the majority of the people are not doing what's right. My job is to stand for what's right and to wait for everybody else to come to their senses. So yes, in that sense of having overcome the negativity that society threw at me as a African American man, prepared me to be able to resist the negativity that society tried to throw at me as a vegan man.
Let me ask you a question, because you and I both know that there is such a disparity of certain chronic diseases in people of color, whether it's obesity, diabetes, they have significantly greater outcome of those problems. Do you feel that that is something that's a byproduct of just overall greed that affects people of lower socioeconomic status? Or do you feel it's a targeting of institutional racism itself? I mean, how do you view that outcome, that such disparity in those populations?
So that's again a fascinating question, and it's a very deep one. One, it has to do with the systemic and structural racism that we see in this country that locks people into environments where they don't have access to healthy food choices, where the kinds of choices that they have in terms of readily available foods tend to be those that are, highly processed, high in fat, filled with all sorts of chemicals. And there is no question that fast food establishments are absolutely targeted to minority and inner city neighborhoods. You don't find, McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and all of these places, Popeyes, and all these places in affluent suburbs. You find them in inner city. So they absolutely aren't targeted to those areas. And that makes, whereas you don't find a lot of Whole Foods in these places. So that, number one, makes these things much more accessible, unfortunately. But on top of that, long ago, it was discovered that people of color have metabolic genes that were called thrifty gene complexes. And what these are is that when you look at traditional diets in West Africans, Native Americans, Mesoamericans, people from South America, Asian, Pacific Island populations, and these were groups that traditionally ate a whole food plant-based diet that was low in fat, contained no dairy, and generally contained very little meat. They, over millennia, adapted for metabolic genes that functioned well in the setting of a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. And these were those thrifty genes, genes that function well in a low-energy setting. When you suddenly take those genes and put them in this high-fat, meat-intensive, high-calorie environment, it causes greater dysregulation and chronic diseases that will ultimately afflict everyone, develop at an even faster rate in those populations. And that is yet another reason that we see minority populations suffering at disproportionate levels. And then the third factor is that there's less access to quality medical care. People they don't have access to, regular well-care visits or doctor's visits or even hospitals. And so they tend not to be able to see a physician until they are forced to, because they have a stroke or a heart attack, or they develop a cancerous tumor that causes such severe dysfunction, they end up being taken to the hospital in an ambulance. And by that point, their health is failing. So it's kind of a combination of all those factors that come together to cause the much poorer outcomes in communities of color relative to non-minority communities.
I got it. So kind of the colonialization of their diet created these epigenetic effects that are highlighting and amplifying these underlying genes that you talk about, when in fact, if they could return to the ways that we're talking about eating, you would down-regulate all of that outcome in a sense, basically.
Oh, absolutely, because there are actual studies that have done exactly that, taken various populations and put them back on diets that mimic their ancestral diets, and you see the disease rates plummet. Right. And so, yes, that is exactly right.
Milton, you've taken biblical inspiration to a place where it's kind of accentuated your voice being as strong as it is to really highlight the truth that's out there, to reveal that. And when I see this quote by Marianne Williamson, which I love, it said, greed and hate and liars have spoken so loudly for so long, it's time for love to stop whispering. How does the day-to-day person, the person who may not be in a vaulted position that you are, professionally, take the reins of that and realize that they have to stop just kind of hiding out in the corner as a vegan or a plant-based person, and really kind of scream this from the rafters, because the information, the data is there to support it. And obviously people are dying in droves from conditions that they don't need to die from if they would just adopt these healthier eating patterns and living patterns.
The truth is the truth.
Right.
And the truth is true whether people believe it or not. And it's something that we can stand on. It's something that we can rely on. And, Jesus said that the truth is like a rock. And if you build your house on that foundation, he said, the storms will beat against it, but the house will not fall. And so I would tell people that have the courage of your convictions. Know that what you believe is true. stand on that truth and don't allow yourself to be dissuaded or moved, because you have truth on your side, and eventually people will see the light. Sometimes use the analogy that, trailblazers get cut by the bushes. and we have to be prepared for that, when we are blazing that path, we're going to meet resistance, or we're going to get pushback. But we can't let that deter us, because God has appointed us watchmen and given us a job to do, and we have to be faithful in that. And, my mantra is, if you believe in God, believe him. And he told us to be plant-based. And when we do that, there are blessings of all types, physical, spiritual, and mental, that flow from it. And that's just it. And it is not, and the blessings flow not just to us, they flow to the other animals and to the planet. It's what's really interesting, Frank, and I know this is going to kind of going off a little bit, but one of the major problems in Western societies is kind of teenage angst and the problems that we see our teenagers going through. But I think that part of the reason is that teenagers start going through issues when their bodies start changing. And in Western countries, that happens like around 11, 12, 13, right? But the reason is because on Western diets, people are eating so much fat, so many animal hormones, that it pushes these kids into puberty 2 to 3 years before they should. Societies are eating a strictly plant-based diet. The boys and girls don't go through menarche and puberty till they're probably 13, 14. Actually, if they were going through puberty at that later stage, their brains would already have kind of developed and be ready to handle that more adult body, so that they wouldn't be out there doing things that they perhaps shouldn't, or feeling like they didn't know how to handle themselves. Again, we're creating problems that we shouldn't have to deal with because of what we're feeding our kids. We're causing them it's like giving a Ferrari to a 10-year-old.
Yeah, they got a teenage body with a brain that doesn't finish development until 23 or 24. Yeah, it's a devastating situation. There's no question. It's a flurry. It's almost a flurry of madness that is part of that dance. I agree 100%. Well, Milton, as we wind this up, is there any final words you'd like to share with the audience? Any advice or anything you'd like to share with people out here?
What we've been talking about, that physics, they talk about the Higgs boson being the God particle, the key to everything. I believe that a vegan diet is the Higgs boson to a human happiness in society, because it is the diet that will give us the best health, the best mental functioning, help us have the best impact on our planet, reduce global warming, and of course, be what's best for the other creatures we share this planet with. So again, I encourage everyone, go plant-based. You'll be healthier, you'll be happier, and the planet and the other creatures on it will thank you.
Well, Dr. Milton Mills, I can't thank you enough. I have such gratitude for the fact that you took the time to come and share your heart, your wisdom, your information with everyone. I encourage our audience to follow you, to gather information from you, and the website for that will be in the show notes. I want to thank the audience out here and all the people that are listening, because without you, we couldn't do what we do. And I thank you for being part of this active, healthy community. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and this podcast is sponsored by the National Health Association, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.